Crystal Charter, Daughter of the Red Seal. Read and written by Rebecca Sewell. Chapter 8. The sun was high in the sky before Maebe dragged herself to the forecastle deck to wait for Clest to come in sight over the glittering water. First, the scar-pocked blasted mountain range jutted from the ocean, with its semicircle hollows carved into the lines of the horizon. Permanent scars from the witch wars 1,000 years past cast their shadow of history over the busy city. Then, the domed rooftops of the largest buildings, the public library and the council hall, shone in white stone, followed by the details of the city. Tall windowed houses and open wide streets. Each building was designed to be cliff-stacked, as in the capital, pushing against the pocked mountains, but where Elpis was weather-stained colour, Clest was pristine white-stoned and well-maintained tile roofs. Instead of toppling buildings supporting one another to remain upright, Clest had neat thought-out lines of construction. It was the clean-shaven brother to the rough charm of Elpis. Even from the decks of the Emoto, Maebe could spot the sparkling mechanic magic of the flitters in the sunlight as they flew high above the city, delivering messages. A system of communication only available in Clest. "Before you go and lose yourself in the city, can you at least come and see where the inn is, so that you don't get lost?" Mouse moaned as he leaned beside her. He looked terrible from their day of drinking. Purple smudges painted under his bloodshot eyes, his usually unruly hair poking out at even stranger angles. "Only because I'm worried about you, looking like that and surrounded by royal toadies. Don't worry, though. My daring, my wit and my bravery will ensure that you arrive at the inn safely," she mocked him for the day before. "I just need you to get me down the gangplank, without us ending up in the water, or on our arses. Edic already has the task of getting us in the carriage before Lord Overeem can lecture me for last night," Mouse said, looping his arm through Maebe's and resting the brunt of his weight on her. "You remember that?" she inquired, with one eyebrow raised with curious anxiety. "Edic told me that Lord Sourface saw me looking less than glorious, so that's why he's responsible for keeping us away from him." Mouse was commander of the Ardal Guard. As such, he was often accompanied by Edic, his second in command. The title was Mouse's reward for being a bastard. Unimportant work that kept him and the washed-out soldiers away from the palace. A backhanded thank you from the king for being honourable, yet irrelevant. Did Edic say anything else? Maebe couldn't remember seeing Mouse's personal guard on the deck last night, but she knew she wasn't far off looking as roughshod as Mouse was. "No. Why? Did I distress anyone else with how low my resistance to wine is? You know, I've only ever seen my father drink beer. Do you think I inherited my intolerance from him?" he asked, rubbing his temple with a groan. Thoughts of the fierce king giggling from too much spring wine had Maebe chuckling as she steered them down the gangplank. Edic hailed them towards a fine-looking carriage with the inn's symbol on it, a white circle with a trilliant blue gem inside. Edic was old, with a full head of grey hair, like most members of the Ardal Guard, but he still held himself as a proud fighter. He had his Ardal uniform on, plate mail on his chest, and mulberry pantaloons held up with a belt holding two severe-looking daggers. Maebe was relieved to see he had left his broadsword and plumed helmet somewhere. She had laughed the first time she visited Ardal Tower and saw Mouse in his uniform. It was only his parade armour, but the giant feathers sprouting from his silver helmet were the most intimidating part of it. She asked if he had accidentally tickled somebody to death standing behind him before. Ardal soldiers were not expected to fight. It was a cushy position, gifted to those who served their king into old age but had no wish to retire. The Ardal Tower watched the era crystal that created the northmost ward. They saw little action from the Thryae. Even in the height of summer, when only the hardiest of insectoids tried to cross the swamp so far north, the chill air left them weaker, so they mostly attacked the southern towers. Not a single Thryae had made it through the shield crystal, but they had come close at Mandible on a few occasions. The older man, didn't let his chestnut brown eyes lock with Mouse's as he mouthed the word "sorry" through his thick white moustache. He opened the door for them with a knowing wink for Maebe. Edic's behaviour left Maebe frowning in confusion. Mouse merely tugged his vivid jacket straight, scowled as he smelt his own breath in the cup of his palm, and clambered into the carriage. "Good day, Lord Overeem. Sleep well, did you?" he exclaimed with false cheer. Maebe muttered a curse, leaving Edic making a deep rumbling sound that she interpreted as a chuckle. "After you, Miss Sumine. Wouldn't want a woman of such fine standing thinking I'd lost all my manners after years of being stationed in the countryside." He gestured toward the carriage steps. "Can you teach Mouse some of those manners?" she mused, leaving Edic and his rumbling laughter to climb in after her. They rolled through the city, scents wafting in through the window that Mouse had opened. Food and machine grease, flowers from blooming trees lining many of the streets. Higher and higher they zigzagged, crossing a stone bridge to the opposing cliffside. Maebe's eyes glazed over as she stared at the passing houses, pretending to ignore the berating words of Lord Overeem and Mouse's affable attempts to change the topic. They arrived in a courtyard belonging to the most beautiful inn Clest could offer. Freshly scrubbed white stone, a huge dark wooden entrance with large leafy trees either side casting shadows on the white walls and cobbled ground. "Shouldn't we be staying at one of the council members as guests?" Maebe whispered to Mouse. "I suggested an inn instead, in hopes that anyone who had tagged along would prefer the gossip gained by keeping with their peers. Lord Harlech took the bait. He's taking his family to Councilwoman Tagg's residence. Unfortunately," he gestured towards Lord Overeem clambering awkwardly out of the carriage, his physique causing him to rely on help from the carriage driver to reach the ground safely. "We do have some largesse in our company." The inn was carved into the white stone of the cliff, rather than built against it. The entrance was shielded from the harshness of the sun by leafy trees, and a small fountain tinkled in a courtyard filled with exotic flowers sprouting from crystals sticking out of the soil. The entirety of the inn had been reserved for them. No doubt it was large enough to house everyone who'd left the capital on the Emoto, and more. Mouse led Maebe down the corridor on the right, the doors lining either side. Lit by crystals to be as bright as the outside, but the cave structure left goose prickles up her arm. "This is your room." He leaned against a pale wall and tapped his knuckle on a tall white door gilded with silver. It faded into deep teal with more intricate patterns that arched overhead. "I'm having the one next door. Edic will be in the servants' chambers attached to mine, and 2 other guards have the room at the other end of the corridor. Should you need anything—" "A maid?" Maebe asked, fluttering her eyes. Elsie had stayed at Speysouth Manor, because certainly still hadn't hired her own lady's maid. "Summoning crystals are inside the room, so you can get someone in the inn to fluff your hair and brush your pillows," Mouse chided, opening the door. Maebe entered the large, beautiful room, which would be hers for the next few weeks. Clean, vibrant white walls, plants and dark furniture, all neutral fabrics, matching the dark wood floor and the wide balcony that overlooked the docks from a distance. No windows. It was protected from the elements by crystals all along the balcony railing. "Mouse, it's beautiful." "But you kept me away from the market just for a room," she frowned at him, and then brushed her fingers over a plant with lush green leaves. "Morgana had this room a few years ago and still talks about it." Mouse strolled across the room and moved a huge sliding panel to one side. "I needed to keep you somewhere I could find you and stop you wandering off all the time. So, here's my trap," he said, gesturing her to go inside the room with a smug smile on his face. Inside lay the largest floor bath she had ever seen, tiled in light marble, with large vases of grain-sized red spinels all along one wall. 4 hunks of raw tanzanite were fastened to the corners of the walls, an unseen barrier to whatever nature would try to throw into the room through the open ceiling above them. Maebe knew what the crystals would do at a glance. She had read about them at the guild house having magic baths. A few grains placed under the water would turn the bath into a translucent sky blue, A handful of weak crystals could turn the colour opaque, and the steam rising from it would form clouds to lazily travel across the surface, matching the sky outside. She grabbed a pile of plush towels from her room and summoned one of the maids by tapping the crystal hanging next to the door. Mouse was kicked out into the hallway to entertain himself for the rest of the day. There was no way she was leaving to go into the city, whilst a private magic bath and a selection of water crystals were waiting in her room.